What's up, everybody? Chris Pennell here. We're going on wide receiver tier rankings for week 12 of the fantasy football season. If you enjoy, make sure you leave a like down below. Subscribe to the channel if you're brand new. Let's dive right into it. And as always, we'll start with the S tier. And hopefully my wide receiver rankings are a little bit less controversial than my running back rankings, because I was getting several comments saying how trash they were. Well, I guess everyone has their own opinion and they have their own right to it, but I wasn't even trying to be crazy. But let's get into it here. We have 3 guys in the S tier for me this weekend. And number 1 for me is actually not Tyreek Hill for the first time in many months now, but it's actually CeeDee Lamb of the Dallas Cowboys. And he and Dak Prescott have been on fire over the past month now. He just continually had great matchups. A bit of a tougher matchup through the air versus the Panthers last week, and it wasn't really a ceiling game for either, but they get a really good spot here versus the Commanders. And when I say really good spot, it's the absolute best spot you can ask for. 29.5 implied team total here on Thanksgiving, 10.5 point favorites. And if you're looking at the Commanders versus the past this season, at least specifically 2 wide receivers, they're allowing the most points per game to quarterbacks and the second most points per game to wide receivers, 195 receiving yards. We know CeeDee Lamb is the alpha dog in this offense. 110 receiving yards per game, nearly 8 catches, close to 10 targets per game on a 27% target share. There's going to be a lot of points put up on Dallas's offense this week. And if it's not going to be Tony Pollard, it's probably going to be CeeDee Lamb. And then number 2, we have Tyreek Hill of the Miami Dolphins. Did ding up his hand a little bit, but it's nothing we should be concerned about. The only concern I have is this is a brutal matchup versus the New York Jets. We just saw Stefan Diggs got shut down last week, and we know Sauce Gardner is an elite level corner, and they're allowing the fewest points per game to the wide receiver position. But if there's ever anybody that is matchup proof, it is Tyreek Hill. He is too fast, and I don't think he's going to be contained on the season. 120 receiving yards per game, 10.5 targets, nearly receiving touchdown, and a 32% target share on top of a 44% market share of the team's air yards. So if this was even a just middle of the road matchup, Tyreek Hill is going to be number 1 for me, but I will give respect to Sauce Gardner of the New York Jets and put him at number 2. Number 3 is going to be A.J. Brown of the Philadelphia Eagles. Horrible performance versus the Kansas City Chiefs, but it was a weird game overall for the passing attack of the Philadelphia Eagles. Took a while for them to even get some points on the board. Jalen Hurts did bail himself out with 2 rushing touchdowns near the end of the game, but he should bounce back here. It's a middle of the road matchup versus Buffalo, but I think in recent weeks their defense has definitely been a little bit more beatable. And this does project to be a pretty high scoring game. 48-point over-under, which is the second highest of the week. 25.75 implied team total here for the Philadelphia Eagles. 3.5 point spread, so it should be back and forth. And his numbers overall this season trump what we saw last weekend versus the Chiefs, who do have a pretty tough defense overall, and they were on the road. 112 yards per game for A.J. Brown, 7.5 catches, nearly 10 targets, a 33% target share, a massive 83% weighted opportunity share, which is the most of any receiver we're going to talk about here, and a massive 48% market share of the team's air yards. He's too good not to bounce back here, so I'm going to fire him up back into the S tier despite the poor performance last week. Stefan Diggs, talking about poor performances last week, he was certainly one of them versus the New York Jets, but he should bounce back because he gets one of the softest matchups you can ask for. So he went from the worst matchup in the world to, on paper, the best matchup in the world, as they're allowing nearly 50 points per game specifically to wide receivers, dead last, 200 receiving yards per game specifically to the position, and 1.5 receiving touchdowns. We know Josh Allen has all the upside in the world, and he should be able to launch a couple balls to Stefan Diggs. I'd be surprised if he doesn't find the end zone. And his averages have gone down the past month now. He's only at 86 receiving yards per game, but he's still getting plenty of volume. And we've just had way too many bad weeks in a row. And I don't believe in guys being due, but honestly, this is probably the most due spot there is. Amon-Ra St. Brown of the Detroit Lions. He plays on Thanksgiving. Bit of a tougher matchup versus the Green Bay Packers, but we just saw a wide receiver who I think is pretty similar to him and Keenan Allen of the Los Angeles Chargers put up a pretty good performance with a wide open drop touchdown earlier in the game, but he still put up points. And they're currently allowing the 5th fewest points per game to the position, but I don't really have any concerns here. He sees too much volume. He's in too good of an offense, 27-point implied team total. And receivers are certainly less reliant on matchups compared to running backs, at least in my opinion, because more than often, you're going to see an elite level wide receiver get there than a elite level running back that happens to be in just an awful matchup. Not saying they can't, but I just think more often than not, elite level wide receivers, especially in PPR scoring, are going to be more reliable. We kind of just talked about him, but we have Keenan Allen here, who basically the same exact play as Amon-Ra St. Brown, in my opinion. If you're looking at their numbers overall this year, both are right around 100 yards per game, both at 8.1 catches, 10.3 targets. Touchdowns have kind of went in Keenan Allen's favor just a little bit more, but both a 29% target share. There's really not much separating these guys whatsoever, and both don't really draw the best matchups in the world. He gets Baltimore this week. He's allowing the 10th fewest points per game, but volume's going to trump all here. He's got one of the best quarterbacks in the league. Don't really have any concerns with Keenan. He's still a bona fide stud at the wide receiver position week in, week out, despite matchups. And up next, these 2 rankings are a bit up in the air because we do not know the actual status of Cooper Kupp. He did not practice on Wednesday, but it's the day before Thanksgiving, and he's a veteran. I'm not really going to put too much into that. Did leave last week's game early, was testing his ankle on the sideline, ended up not returning, but he didn't look super serious. But who's to say he still might not return this week? But if he happens to be back, I think he deserves to be wide receiver 1 versus Arizona. Just a super soft matchup. And we know he's going to be in line for potentially double-digit targets. I mean, on the season when Cooper Kupp's been healthy, talking a 32% target share. Now, leaving early last week did hinder his overall numbers, but 8.6 targets per game, under 5 catches. He has been sliding in recent weeks, but we know the talent's still there, and the role in this offense is not going to change. Matthew Stafford loves the guy, but if he happens to be out, you can fire up Puka Nacua as a bona fide wide receiver 1, top 12 guy this week, in my opinion, because when we don't have Cooper Kupp on the field, Matthew Stafford will look his way. So we look at the first 4 weeks of the season when Cooper Kupp was gone on the IR. 15 targets, 20 targets, 7 targets, 10 targets, and 11 targets when Cooper Kupp returned. And then with him leaving early last week, we saw 7 targets and he found the end zone for a pretty solid fantasy day. But a soft matchup versus Arizona, 1.5 point spread here. I could see this game having sneaky shootout potential. And then dropping down to the B tier, we're going to lead off with Michael Pittman of the Indianapolis Colts. And while Gardner Minshew isn't the best talent in the world, he's good enough to at least feed Michael Pittman. That's good enough for me in a great matchup versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who are bleeding points for the wide receiver position this season. We just saw Brandon Ayuk absolutely destroy them last week. And I'm not saying the Colts offense is as good as the 49ers, but they should still have no problem feeding Michael Pittman here. Currently allowing the third most points per game for the position. And on the season, Pittman is being fed 9.5 targets per game on a 30% target share and a 70% weighted opportunity share, over 6 catches per game and 70 yards. Love the matchup. We're playing in a dome, so don't have any weather to worry about as well. Brandon Ayuk, we just talked about him. Destroyed the Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense last week, and while I'm not sure he's going to do the same versus Seattle and drop a 70-yard touchdown, it's still a plus matchup here as a wide receiver versus the Seahawks, who are currently 19th versus the position. And he's the wide receiver 1 in this offense. He's established that over Deebo Samuel. 85 yards per game, 7 targets, 27.5% target share, and a really good 15.1 ADOT with a 46.5% market share of the team's air yards. No reason not to like Ayuk this week, and he's a borderline wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2. Mike Evans is going to be heavily targeted every single week. Was a good game script last weekend, just didn't really quite get the yardage. Had plenty of targets and did have that 1-yard touchdown in the first half, which is actually all he had to show for in the first half, but good matchup versus the Indianapolis Colts. Their pass defense is pretty much middle of the road versus wide receivers, but overall, this is definitely a beatable defense for Mike Evans. And if he gets 10 plus targets in this one, I like it quite a bit. On the season, averaging 7.5, but if they are trailing in this one as they are underdogs, I do like it. We know Baker Mayfield's going to look his way around the red zone. And then Tank Dell of the Houston Texans. I know Nico Collins is there, and we saw him get double-digit targets last weekend, but it seems like CJ Stroud has found his favorite wide receiver, and Tank Dell is an absolute beast out there. I mean, it seems like you're the preferred option for a quarterback that's dropping nearly 300 yards per game this season at 291 in an offense that should be able to put up points and move the ball each week, and a defense that is beatable that should put them in games where they're not going to be blowing teams out. 1.5 point underdogs in this one versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. 47.5 point over under, 23 point implied team total. So this does look like one of the better fantasy games of the week, in my opinion. And they are currently 20th versus the position at wide receiver. So Tank Dell, Nico Collins like them all this week, but Tank Dell does get the slight nod. And he's been scoring quite a bit of touchdowns this season as well. Only behind Mike Evans by a little bit at 0.63 compared to 0.67. Then we have Devontae Adams, who is in quarterback purgatory. Unfortunately, AOC, we know, is not the best quarterback in the world, but he's still receiving targets. I believe we have 26 the previous 2 weeks. So volume is not an issue. 32% target share, 44% market share of the team's air yards, and 80% weight opportunity share, 9.5 targets per game. The issue is quarterback play. The offense stinks. 17.25 implied team total. They are 9.5 point dogs versus KC, so we know they're going to be chucking the ball. But we just saw with AJ Brown, it's a tough matchup. Then moving on to our C tier, how the mighty have fallen. We have Jamar Chase all the way down here, but when you lose Joe Burrow, one of the best quarterbacks in football, and now you have Jake Browning, well, yeah, you're going to have to get downgraded. The volume is still probably going to be there, but the quality of targets is certainly going to go way down. And the team total also way down. 16.5 this week, a 34.5 over-under in this game, which is abysmal. I believe it's the second worst on the slate besides the Patriots game. Now, it is a decent matchup versus Steelers. They're 27 versus receivers, allowing nearly 200 receiving yards per game. I mean, Jamar Chase is one of the absolute most talented receivers in the league, but I mean, a lot of circumstances that are definitely trending him downwards. 10.5 targets per game on a 30% target share. I think he at least deserves to be in the C tier. We did see him catch a touchdown late with Browning, so there might be a little bit of upside there, but I'm not counting on it. Devontae Smith actually had a decent game versus KC. They shut down AJ Brown, but he was able to get close to 100 yards and just got tackled on the 1 yard line on a bomb to the right side of the field late in the game with Jalen Hurts. Ended up being the game-winning touchdown when he sneaked it in with a tush push. Then we had DK Metcalf here of the Seattle Seahawks. He's my preferred option over Tyler Lockett. Both are viable options. But this is actually a pretty decent spot versus San Francisco. And not that I love picking on their defense, but they are pretty soft versus wide receivers. On the season, they're currently 25th versus position, allowing nearly 170 receiving yards per game. We know Metcalf, he's got plenty of upside, 7.25 targets per game on a 23% target share. Also a really nice 42% market share of the team's air yards. And it sounds like Geno Smith is going to play in this one. So assuming they're trailing, which Vegas is projecting as a 7-point dog, I don't hate the game script there. Nico Collins, honestly, I feel like he could be pretty close to Tank Dell, but my projections just had him a couple of points lower. He had 11 targets in his return, so it's not like Tank Dell is the absolute alpha dog here and nobody else is going to get their share. There's plenty of targets to go around in this offense and plenty of yardage to go around as well. So him, Nico Collins, and Noah Brown should all have upside here. Even Robert Woods and Dalton Schultz. I think everybody is going to eat here. It's a good matchup versus Jacksonville. Basically, everything I said about Tank Dell can be applied here for Nico. Adam Thielen, he's a boring play, but he gets plenty of targets in this offense. And it's actually a plus matchup versus Tennessee's secondary. They're a little stiff on the run, although they've definitely been a bit softer in recent weeks, but they're currently 25th versus the position. And we just saw Calvin Ridley go absolutely nuclear versus them. And trust me, that's not been easy to do so far this season. So there's definitely holes in this secondary. But on the season, 9.5 targets per game, over 7.5 catches, 27.7% target share. He's not a flashy play, but if you're in PPR scoring, those catches add up in a hurry. Then we had DJ Moore of the Chicago Bears. Justin Fields returned last week. He got into the end zone once again. He's just like really good, solid wide receiver. I have nothing bad to say about DJ Moore. I don't really have a ton of amazing things to say about him, but he's solid as it comes. It's a good matchup versus Minnesota. They're currently 24th versus wide receivers. The quarterback play is always going to be a bit of an issue for him. Justin Fields is not the best pocket passer in the world, but he's good enough to at least feed him the ball, and he gets plenty of volume, so I'm fine with DJ Moore this week. Calvin Ridley. Bit of a blow-up week versus Tennessee now. He's always been up or down this season, so it's not that I'm really expecting this going forward. But I do like the upside here, and I'm having him slightly edge out Christian Kirk for me this week, but they're going to be back-to-back in my rankings. I feel like Kirk is a bit more safe with the floor, but we know the ceiling is extremely high with Calvin Ridley. He did present that last week. And trust me, we're almost done with the C tier. It's just such a long list because once you get past like the elite studs, there's not a ton separating the rest of the wide receivers because there's so many guys every single week that have the potential to get 20-plus points. Meanwhile, at the running back position, you're lucky if a lot of those guys get double digits, but at wide receiver, there's just so many of them each and every single week. But we're going to move on to Chris Olave of the New Orleans Saints. Now, I wish Jameis Winston was going to be the quarterback because when Derek Carr got injured last week, Winston came in and we immediately saw success. He's one of the most fun fantasy quarterbacks every single time he is on the field, but Derek Carr did practice fully this week. He still has to clear concussion protocol, but assuming he does, he's going to get the volume, but him and Derek Carr just do not have a great connection, but volume is no concern this year. He's been an air yards monster. 1,300 on the season, 15.4 ADOT, 43% market share of the team's air yards, and nearly 10 targets per game. But this is all equating to only 65 receiving yards, 5.5 catches, and still a nice 27% target share, but it's not really finding the end zone too often. So again, I wish Jameis Winston would be the quarterback, but it does seem like Derek Carr is going to be under center this weekend. Jalen Waddle of the Miami Dolphins, really tough spot here, but most of the attention will be on Tyreek Hill, so this could lead to some softer coverage for Jalen Waddle, so that's the one silver lining here. And this is an offense that's still going to throw the ball, put up points, 25-point implied team total, so it's going to have to go somewhere. And if we don't expect Tyreek Hill to have an absolute ceiling game, it could end up being Jalen Waddle being solid this week. And then we have Deebo Samuel of the 49ers. Brandon Ayuk has definitely taken over the alpha dog wide receiver one role, but we know Deebo is still super talented. He can have big play upside. So there's still potential here, and this is an offense that can certainly put up points every single week, and it's a good matchup versus Seattle. And last time he played the Seahawks, absolute monster performance. But like I said, Ayuk has definitely separated himself from Deebo quite a bit in the receiving game because Deebo's only at 4.8 targets per game on an 18% target share, 16% market share of the team's air yards with a 6.5 ADOT. So a lot of his play is going to have to be through yards after catch because they want him in open field to make big plays, and it's really tough to tackle. Moving on to our D tier, I'm not saying these guys are D tier talents, but at some point we just can't have everybody in the B and C tier, so they just have to filter down low. No disrespect to them, it's just where they lie in the projections this week. But we have Zay Flowers leading us off from the Baltimore Ravens. And with no Mark Andrews, I'm not sure it's going to be a direct bump to Zay Flowers, but when you take one of the best tight ends off the field, I would say pretty much everybody else is going to get a bump, including Isaiah Likely, who's going to fill in. Now, you can't completely step in his shoes and beat Mark Andrews, but they're just going to have to soak up targets somewhere because the Ravens aren't just going to throw the ball less than 8 times per game without Mark Andrews now. But it's a great matchup versus the Chargers, 25.25 implied team total on the road in LA. And one of the primetime games, 46.5 over-under and a 4-point spread. And the Chargers are awful versus receivers. They're only the 5th most points in the position. Zay Flowers is the wide receiver one in this offense. Not getting into the end zone because this team loves running the football, but still pretty healthy, 25.5% target share. And like I said, with no Mark Andrews, that could go up. Chris Godwin of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Mike Evans is definitely the preferred option. It used to be where these guys are pretty much neck and neck in projections, but Evans definitely has the edge because he's getting to the end zone way more often than Chris Godwin. He's still seeing healthy targets, over 7 per game, but a lower ADOT and just hasn't really shown quite the upside. But the Colts are pretty much middle of the road versus wide receivers, and this is still a matchup that I'm fine with. And then we have DeAndre Hopkins, who I would have a little bit higher if it was a better matchup. And I know the Panthers, you don't really think of them as a great defense, but versus the past, they actually haven't given up too many points this season, currently the 4th fewest per game. And on the year, we're seeing still plenty of opportunity for DeAndre Hopkins, and Will Levis under center is definitely bigger upside than a guy like Ryan Tannehill. 26.5% target share, at 41% market share of the team's air yards. And actually, the ADOT of 16.3 for DeAndre Hopkins is the best of any receiver we have talked about. So he's still getting plenty of opportunity. He's not as good as he used to be, but I don't think he's completely washed quite yet. And Terry McLaurin of the Washington Commanders, it's going to be a tough spot here for Sam Howell and the Washington Commanders offense, facing the Dallas Cowboys on the road on Thanksgiving Day, 10.5 point dogs, 48.5 over under, but pretty tough matchup as they're allowing the second fewest points per game to the position, but he's still getting plenty of volume, and they should be throwing the ball quite a bit as they should be trailing. Nearly 8 targets per game on a 23% target share. We know he's talented. Sam Howell's throwing the ball more than any quarterback recently. Nearly 275 passing yards per game. I know the matchup sucks, but they're going to have to move the ball somehow, and we know Terry McLaurin's going to get targets. And the next two guys, they're good wide receivers. They're going to get plenty of volume, and they're talented, but it's just quarterback play that is holding them back. So we have Garrett Wilson of the New York Jets, which we thought was going to be a top 10, top 5 receiver this season with Aaron Rodgers. We went from Aaron Rodgers to Zach Wilson, now to Tim Boyle. I mean, just horrible luck for Garrett Wilson. And then we have Deontay Johnson, who is stuck with Kenny Pickett, who is honestly might be the worst starting quarterback in the league. I know there's a couple backups out there, so I'm not going to include them, but he is terrible. He's still going to get volume, and it's a decent matchup versus Cincinnati. They're middle of the road versus the position. It's a decent matchup for Garrett Wilson as well. And they are 9.5 point dogs, so they should be throwing the ball quite a bit. And volume's not an issue, and talent's not an issue. It's just quarterback play for both of these guys is definitely going to hinder them. Then we have Drake London. Desmond Ridder is back, and I guess another guy here that's just going to have poor quarterback play. And you can probably say that for a lot of these guys once we get down low, because when you have a great quarterback, you put them in a good situation, typically any wide receiver can't succeed, maybe besides MVS. We saw that with Patrick Mahomes on Monday night. That drop was terrible, but London should be in line for 5+ targets, 22% target share. Matchup versus New Orleans isn't exactly great, allowing the 8th fewest points per game, but we are in slip pickings territory. And moving on to the F tier, we're going to start with Josh Downs of the Indianapolis Colts. Being the wide receiver 2 for Gardner Minshew isn't exactly the most exciting thing in the world, but there's still going to be volume here to be had. Nearly 6 targets per game, 18% target share. And like I said, with Michael Pittman, this matchup is great as they're allowing the 3rd most points per game to the position. Marquise Brown, he just really hasn't been putting up the points recently. We saw Rondale Moore have that long touchdown last week for 48 yards. Then the week before it was Trey McBride, so he hasn't exactly been great with Kyler Murray just yet. But we know the upside is still there for Marquise Brown. Still sports a 27% target share in the season, 41% market share of the team's air yards. Just takes a couple plays for Marquise Brown to get there, and it's a beatable matchup versus that Rams secondary. Jordan Addison, he's a stud, and we're still really iffy on the status of Justin Jefferson. If he happened to return, which I don't think is going to happen, then you'd probably take him out of the rankings. But if he's still the wide receiver 1 in this offense, nearly a 25-point implied team total for the Minnesota Vikings this week. And the Chicago Bears are middle of the road versus receivers. I'd be fine with him as a deep league flex play. Amari Cooper, another guy that's just quarterback issues. DTR did get the Browns the win last week versus Pittsburgh, but it's definitely nuking his upside to not have Deshaun Watson. And Cortland Sutton, pretty low in the rankings, but he has been scoring touchdowns. It's just a really tough spot versus the Cleveland Browns, allowing the 3rd fewest points per game to the position. But if he can get into the end zone like he has been quite often this season, nearly at 0.8 receiving touchdowns per game, that's going to at least keep him fantasy relevant. But with that being said, that's all I got for today's video. So I hope you enjoyed. If you did, even if you didn't, make sure you like down below. Subscribe to the channel for brand new. Show the best of luck on the Thursday games. And I hope you all have a great Thanksgiving. And I'll see you all next time.